A 50-year U.S. Treasury redeemable by gold? Let's talk about it with Dr. Judy Shelton. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vierra, part of the outreach team of Silver Bullion here in Singapore, where we want to help you truly secure your wealth. Dr. Judy Shelton joins us today. Dr. Shelton has been consulted on international economic financial issues by national security officials at the White House, the U.S. Congress, and the Pentagon. And she has received a postdoctoral fellowship from the Hoover Institution at Stanford University as a National Fellow, and she was named as a Hoover Senior Research Fellow. Dr. Shelton has written a few books, including her most recent book titled Good as Gold. And we're delighted to have Dr. Shelton join us here as a first-time guest. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Dr. Judy Shelton. Dr. Shelton, welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Glad to have you on. I'm excited as well. First question, I want to ask you, what is it like in a day of, let's just say, presidential economic advisor and consulting on economics to the Pentagon?
Well, it's not something that would happen every day. I provided some economic advice on specific issues when asked during the 2016 campaign. And then I did work on the transition team. So I guess it would be late 2016, early 2017. I was at the Treasury most every day because I was made the lead advisor for international affairs. So that was a great learning experience. I think anyone who's interested in monetary policy and the impact of central banks and currencies and commodities and international finance would have loved to have had that experience, because you get exposed at the Treasury to the people who are dealing with it every day. So I really enjoyed that, and also working on the hearing for the incoming Treasury Secretary. I helped prepare Treasury Secretary Mnuchin for questions he might get in his own confirmation hearing at the Senate. As far as advising the Pentagon, I've just had a few occasions, but that happened going way, way back when I'd written a book on the Soviet Union. So we're talking about the end of the 1980s. I was out at Stanford University and was investigating the impact of Western capital on the Soviet economy. So that caused me to look at their internal monetary and financial conditions, and kind of like an accountant. It's sort of boring work. I mean, just numbers. I happen to like that. But I came to this very startling conclusion that that country was going to go bankrupt. So by the time I was explaining my results to people who were involved in national security, the book then had a much more sensationalist title, which was The Coming Soviet Crash, because I was saying that country can't go on. And then I found myself asked to participate in war gaming exercises, because then it became an issue for Western governments. If the Soviet Union is going to disappear and die, do you want to be antagonizing it, or do you want to pacify it? I mean, do you poke a sick bear, or do you let it die quietly in the corner and be nice to it and just wait it out? So that was interesting. And then I've had a few occasions since then to work with strategists at the Pentagon, or to just give my thoughts. That I wouldn't want to say too much about it, but a small group of economists would meet with the head of the Joint Chief of Staff to listen to various scenarios that could happen in the world, and give our sense of what would happen in international financial markets. Would they spike? Would they recover? How would they stabilize? What would be the impact of various geopolitical events under different scenarios? So I find that that's an interesting place to be. I'm not I never saw myself as a national security expert, but clearly financial markets and the U.S. primary role and having the world's dominant reserve currency is a very strong form of soft power, and it does figure into our overall strategy for dealing with other countries and maintaining our place in the world.
I read some of those parts in your book. It's a great book, by the way, Good as Gold. And in that book, in the preface, the very beginning, you state money is a moral contract. Can you go into the morality of money and this contract?
Well, I really feel that it is, in the sense that money is meant to be a tool for measuring, and it really fits into all of the plans that an individual makes when they decide how many hours should I work, how many hours should I play, how much should I save, how much should I invest, how much should I spend. It's involved in every detail of your planning your life or caring for your family. And so I feel that since we do have legal tender laws and you're required to make those calculations based on the measurement we have, which is our money unit, the US dollar, it is a responsibility of government to deliver a stable unit of account and a reliable store of value. That is, there's a moral requirement on the part of the government to provide you with an accurate measure, because it's so important to, particularly for Americans, the whole concept, our founding values of personal liberty, economic liberty. And if you are saddled with a money unit that is not reliable, or you can't make meaningful plans because the value could change, you could lose purchasing power just by saving in that unit of account, and then by the time you're ready to use those savings for retirement or for whatever purpose, they're not worth as much. I think that's a moral failing on the part of the government.
Before we get into your idea of linking the U.S. dollar through a treasury bond offering gold redeemability, I want to play you a short clip from something that President John Kennedy said back in the day, and then get your thoughts on the words that he spoke.
Several times recently, you expressed concern about the gold drain. Why does the United States, of all the major nations in the world, permit foreign holders of its currencies to exchange it for gold? And while this practice continues, even if we achieved a balance of international payments, would we be able to stop the drain of gold?
Well, if the United States refused to cash in dollars for gold, then everyone would go to the gold standard. The United States, which is the reserve currency of the whole free world, we would all be dependent upon the available supply of gold, which is quite limited. Obviously isn't enough to finance the great movements of trade today, and would be the most backward step that the United States has taken since the end of the Second World War.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know what are your thoughts when you hear Kennedy say those things back in the day?
Well, he was president during the Bretton Woods era, and the Bretton Woods system was worked out in 1944, and the idea was that we had been on a gold standard, that is, the whole world had, from 1880 to 1913, and then World War I caused all nations to just start printing money and to go off the gold standard. But by the 20s, nations were trying to come back to it. They were making some mistakes because meantime there had been inflation. So, for example, in Britain, they tried to go back in 1925 to the old ratio, to the old convertibility rate. And various countries tried to get back to have some kind of a level international monetary playing field based on gold as a common denominator, the reserve asset, which makes sense for international trade. But then in the 1930s, we had what was called the beggar thy neighbor policies. And you had countries trying to cheapen their currencies relative to gold in order to get a trade advantage. And so it's currency depreciation. They called it competitive depreciation, but it's it's really not competing, it's cheating, because you're sending different price signals. It's currency manipulation to gain an unfair trade advantage for your exports and to make it harder for people in your country. They don't want to buy these now more expensive products coming in from the country against which currency you depreciated your own. So that's still an issue. And the way that countries would try to combat the currency manipulation was through tariffs. So you also had a very heavy use of tariffs. And what happened in the 30s was just a downward spiral of more tariffs being applied, and then countries debasing their currencies to kind of recover the trade advantage, and then higher tariffs, and then more depreciation. And that was really the cause of a lot of economic decline throughout the 30s, basically a currency war that many people think was really sowing the seeds of the real war that followed with World War II at the end of the 30s. So it was not until after the U.S. was drawn into World War II, it was not until after December 7th, 1941, that the United States Treasury then said, we don't know how this war is going to end, but we know that the countries being attacked in Europe won't be enthused to go back to anything like we had in the 1930s. We have to give them hope that there will be a new solid monetary foundation for free trade and for rebuilding those economies. So the Bretton Woods system was set up to be similar to a gold standard in that you would have fixed exchange rates among the currencies. You wouldn't let countries anymore debase their currencies to gain an unfair trade advantage. Under the Bretton Woods system, the countries would have to keep a fixed exchange rate between their currency and the US dollar. And by fixed, I mean it could only move 1% above or below. It really had to be stable exchange rate. And but then if the US were to inflate its own currency, those other countries at some point could say, you're exporting your inflation to us because as you inflate, we have to inflate to maintain the same exchange rate. And we don't want to do that. So those other countries had the right to redeem the dollars that came into their countries for a fixed amount of gold. So it was called not a gold standard, but a managed gold standard. And that's what President Kennedy would be referring to in that system. And it was the idea that we're no longer having all countries hold adequate gold reserves to back up their own currencies. Those countries just have to keep a stable exchange rate with the U.S., but the U.S. would maintain convertibility between the dollar and gold at the rate of $35 per ounce of gold, and the foreign governments could exercise that privilege if they thought the dollar was being inflated and they preferred to have the gold.
Do you see any similarities in some way where today we have tariffs and in part it's unfair trade agreements, let's say, or trade practices, or in some cases currency manipulation, let's say, and these are things that currency manipulation anyway is something that gold could hold to account anyway.
Well, I definitely do. And the first part of the question, do I see comparisons? Decidedly so. I'm not even sure we have to say it's deliberate manipulation, but it's happening. For instance, the U.S. largest trade partner is Mexico. In the last year, the depreciation rate between the Mexican peso and the U.S. dollar is 20%. So if you were to even say apply a 20% tariff, that would then even the monetary playing field, because otherwise anything priced in Mexican pesos that then is exported to the U.S. is going to be 20% cheaper when denominated in dollars from what it was the year before. So that would give a price advantage against domestically produced products, or just say rival competitive products that are produced in the U.S. because now they seem expensive compared to the ones that have come in from Mexico. And I understand a country might reasonably say, look, we have to do what's in the best interest of our country. And so in Mexico's case, their central bank, their basic interest rate is about twice what ours is. We're at 4.4 now, and they've been closer to 9.5. So they've been coming down. But the point is, they're loosening their monetary policy, which then causes the peso to fall in value relative to the dollar. And Canada, likewise, is talking about looser monetary policy. So those are our two top trade partners. The European Central Bank is lowering their interest rate faster than we are. Our Federal Reserve, our central bank, is in a wait-and-see position. And so the problem is our trade partners, and let's look at China. They've really been accused of currency manipulation in the past, and they're very sensitive to it because the U.S. has indicated they won't tolerate it. But China also had started out the year saying we're going to loosen our monetary policy. So the point is, you still have this trade-off where the countries that, we'll call it no-fault currency depreciation, whether they do it deliberately or not, they have a choice. They could run their monetary policy in such a way that they maintained a stable exchange rate value with the dollar. I'm not saying they have to, but if they decide they have other economic objectives that are more important to them, they should nevertheless understand that from a U.S. point of view, to be fair to our manufacturers, we could apply a tariff just to bring up to the same level the cost of their goods denominated in dollars and not allow currency depreciation to give them that unfair trade advantage.
Back in the 30s, as you were saying, it led to a world war. Let's just hope that this time around it doesn't do the same. But I want to get into your book. You brought forward the idea of linking the U.S. dollar through a treasury bond offering gold redeemability. How would this work?
Well, it's actually not a new idea. It was first proposed in 1981. It was in a Wall Street Journal opinion piece by Alan Greenspan, who, of course, would turn out later to be the head of our Federal Reserve and one of the longest serving, about 18 years. He was the head of the world's most influential central bank. And he proposed at that time that if you had a U.S. Treasury offering that was redeemable in gold, that would really put pressure on Congress to rein in overspending. It's when you run fiscal deficits, when your outlays are a greater number than your revenues to the federal budget, you're creating excess purchasing power, which is then monetized by the Federal Reserve. So that puts pressure on prices. And so what you would want to do is if Congress saw that people preferred a gold-backed treasury bond to a fiat currency, a traditional treasury bond, which just says you're going to get this many dollars in the future and you'll get this interest rate. Well, a lot of people, they'll buy those treasury securities, but we also saw that some people said, but what do I care what the interest rate is if at the end of the period, whether it's 2 years or 10 years or 20 or 30 years, if my purchasing power has been so reduced by inflation that I lost even the benefit of receiving interest payments during that time. So that brought about in 1999 what are called Treasury inflation protected securities, TIPS bonds. And they were set up to say, okay, you want to make a loan to the government, you're going to buy a treasury security, you're concerned about losing purchasing power because maybe inflation comes in higher than the market is expecting. These bonds will compensate you in accordance with the change in the consumer price index. So you just lock in the interest rate, but then you will be compensated for the additional impact of the CPI, the consumer price index, going up. the idea for gold-backed bond, in my view, is very similar. It's just that you're saying a person who might buy one is saying, yes, I'm willing to make a loan to the government. And let's say I would give them, let's say $3,000. So that's roughly the price of an ounce of gold today. So let's say I'm willing to buy a treasury bond for $3,000 today. And what I'm entitled to as a holder of this gold-backed bond is at the end of the period, I get back either the face amount on the bond, which is what any treasury bond would give you back your principal at maturity, or a pre-specified amount of gold. So I have the option. I can either take the gold or the amount on the bond. And that's how they would work. And the whole idea would be, how long would it be? It could be fairly short duration. I've come around to thinking these could be 50-year bonds because that was anticipated. Some countries already issued 50-year bonds. But maybe it could even be sort of the kind of bond that parents or grandparents might buy for a child. The idea would be at the end of that period, you would either get an ounce of gold or you would get the face amount on the bond. Now, we haven't set that face amount, but depending what it is, that would determine what I would pay for today, what I would pay to get that choice in the future. And I think that would be an interesting way to have a sort of barometer that people could look at the yield on a gold-backed treasury bond compared to the yield on a traditional treasury bond. And that would say a lot about their belief in the future purchasing power of the dollar. Because at one time, yes, the dollar was as good as gold. So for this issuance of treasury bonds, the dollar is as good as gold because you are guaranteed a certain amount of gold or a certain amount of dollars. So you're going to be specifying a price for gold in dollars on that future date. And you could make it the same price as today. You could say, what would you as an investor pay for an instrument that 50 years from now lets you have either $3,000 or an ounce of gold? Now, if you think the dollar is going to continue to be debased, you would say, well, for sure, I know in 50 years, I'd rather have the ounce of gold. Well, that's the question. Is the dollar as good as gold? It can be, it has been, but that puts pressure then on both Congress on the fiscal side and I think on our own central bank, the Federal Reserve, to show investors that the value is going to be as close as possible to what it could be if the dollar, either you could change the Fed's target instead of 2% inflation target, maybe it should be a 0 inflation target. Isn't that the definition of stable prices, which is the Fed's mandate? Or you could decide that the price would be more than $3,000 in the future for an ounce of gold and put that as the face value. Maybe you even accept if the Fed's going to inflate, which is their own target rate at 2%, maybe you make that the future value, and then all the Fed has to do is live up to what it said it's going to do. It's the pricing that will be very important, but I think the concept is equally important. Put the pressure on the Fed and on Congress to provide sound finances and sound money in the future. And all they have to do is beat expectations in order to make that a good borrowing instrument for the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah, your book, Good as Gold, you gave a lot of great examples. And I think what I understood from this was the Treasury Trust Bond, let's say if it were called that, the gold-backed Treasury, these TTB securities would maintain steady purchasing power for investors interested in gold as a store of value, and holders of these TTB obligations, they would be assured that they will never receive less than the amount of gold linked to the original purchase of the security. Those were the points that we got. But also, there's some talk of commodities, a basket of commodities. And in your book, you had written where Vivek Ramaswamy who was a recent presidential candidate, suggested tying the dollar to gold, silver, nickel, and agricultural commodities. What's your view on putting commodities in there?
I understand the argument, and I guess you could say from a diversification point of view, some people think that average price has benefits. I think the priority for me is keep it simple. Gold has long been a surrogate for money. I mean, speaking of Alan Greenspan, he says it's the only true currency in the world. We know that central banks are acquiring it. It's been universally acknowledged as a monetary surrogate. I think that I would rather keep it pure. The only other thing I have looked at, I think a bimetallic standard has worked quite well historically. So silver has great appeal to me. On the other hand, the U.S. is the largest holder of gold reserves, and gold is part of the reserves of every central bank. And so we have gold already, and we carry it at a very low value of our 261 million ounces. We carry it at a book value on the government's balance sheet of 11 billion, because we carry it at the value of $42.22 an ounce, which is what it was when we finally ended the Bretton Woods system in February of 1973 under the Smithsonian Agreement. Well, obviously there's a huge windfall profit in that now. If you mark to market, we're talking about closer to $800 billion. So that would be quite a nice windfall to capture for addressing our budgetary outlook. But rather than sell the gold and just take that profit, which you could conceivably do, I would rather use that as collateral and warehouse it separately and audit it, and whatever it takes to make it clear legally that gold is to be used for one purpose, which is to redeem the Treasury trust bonds. Then I think that's a far greater, more useful purpose for that gold. And it would also prevent some future administration from just selling it off. And given that we're still looking at deficit spending far into the future, I would hate to just waste that and have it go down the rat hole of deficit spending. I think it's very important to recognize that as a monetary bulwark, and it stands behind our currency. It's increasing in value. We see that. Let that be an instrument where we have an advantage as the largest holder, and I think it fits in perfectly with the U.S. objective of continuing to have the dollar be the world's dominant reserve currency. I also think if you did Treasury trust bonds, that you could issue stable coins that would be 100% backed. Right now, they have to be backed by treasuries or by cash. But I could imagine leveraging the impact of doing this by having stable coins that have some percentage of gold-backed treasury bonds among their total bond holdings. And I think that would be an interesting way to sort of have stable coins that they operate like a currency board. By that, I mean they have to be 100% covered by near dollar securities, treasuries. But I'm thinking it could be interesting if you made it part of the marketing of different stable coins. You could have a stable coin that only had gold-backed treasury bonds backing it. Then you'd have a 100% stable coin backed by a dollar as good as gold. But you could certainly do that fractionally as well. I'm sure there would be interested investors, depending on what percentage of gold they want backing their investment.
I know you need to head out soon, so I'll just ask this last question. Dr. Shelton, how much is at stake in this pursuit of sound money?
I think it's an imperative. I'm so heartened by the effort we're seeing in Washington. It's almost impossible to believe that we have such a sincere, hard-hitting, earnest and meaningful effort to move us towards sound finances. to actually hear President Trump talk about wanting to achieve a balanced budget as an objective takes a lot of courage. I haven't heard a president, Democrat or Republican, say that as a real objective, that they really are going to make the effort to get there and not just mouth it. So I'm impressed by that. You need sound finances because, as I started out by saying, if the government can keep overspending and then our central bank buys the debt and then turns that into money, you're just never going to have sound money. So I would like to see us move toward a balanced budget. And I think that having sound finances and sound money is the only way that the United States can finally confront what we all call an existential crisis, which is the unsustainability of our current budgetary path. So I think it's a critical moment. And I just hope we can grab it by the reins. But if we truly embrace a balanced budget and then issue a gold-backed treasury bond that says in 50 years, we expect to be standing tall and to have met the challenge of what looked like an unsustainable future. Having looked at how a country can go bankrupt, maybe I'm particularly sensitive to it because at the time that I could see on paper that the Soviet Union would not be a viable country because it was financing this huge deficit between income and outlays by the government, and that financial capital was just being channeled back to government to finance deficit spending. I see us following a similar pattern, and it makes it very real to me. Countries can go bankrupt. So yes, critical moment.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. I read that part, and I was even going to ask you about that similarities between the Soviet Union debt bankruptcy and the U.S., where it currently is right now. But Dr. Judy Shelton, I want to thank you for your time and valuable perspectives and insights. How might the viewers follow you on social media, and what can they expect when they buy your book, Good as Gold?
Well, if they're interested, I'm delighted. It's on Amazon, and the royalties go to Independent Institute. I like that think tank. You can follow my writings at independentinstitute.org and just put in my name, or on X at Judy Shell. Not Judy Shelton. I just put at Judy Shell. You can follow me on X if you're interested. So thank you for letting me address your listeners. I'm grateful for your audience and your interest, and I think this is a compelling moment, and I'm very much gratified to find so many people also feel as I do that this is a chance to go for sound finances and sound money for our country, and maybe all governments can start to rein in excess spending and let private entrepreneurs, let small and medium-sized businesses, the people who make things and produce goods and services, give them a chance to have access to credit. Don't just keep channeling it back to government. Let it flow into the private economy where it can really help finance the dreams of big thinkers, and I think be a much better economic result for our country, and I think countries around the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing, huh? But
Yeah.
Judy Shelton, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to finish out that book. I've got it both on Kindle and Audible, so I will listen to it or read it. Either way, I'm going to get to the end of it. It's really a great book, and I do hope we can do this again soon.
Thanks so much. I look forward to it. Appreciate it.
That was Judy Shelton sharing her views on the economy and having the U.S. dollar once again backed by gold. If you enjoyed Dr. Shelton's views, you can follow her on Twitter at Judy Shell. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give it a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.